The marble floors of First National Bank gleamed under fluorescent lights as Marcus Williams stepped through the heavy glass doors. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished surface, each step deliberate and confident. The charcoal Tom Ford suit fit him perfectly, tailored to his athletic frame, while his platinum watch caught the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus had built empires from nothing. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals in boardrooms across 3 continents. Yet standing in this sterile banking hall, he felt the familiar weight of being judged before he even opened his mouth. "Good morning," he said to the receptionist, his voice warm and professional. "I'd like to speak with someone about opening a business account." The young woman's smile faltered slightly as she looked him up and down. Let me get the manager for you." Patricia Hendricks emerged from her office like a sentinel guarding treasure. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her navy blazer seemed to armor her against the world. She approached Marcus with the measured steps of someone who had already made her decision. "Can I help you?" The words carried no warmth, no welcome. "Yes, I'm interested in opening a business account. I have all the necessary." "Sir, opening a business account requires extensive documentation." Patricia's interruption was sharp, clinical. "Credit checks, employment verification, tax returns from the past 3 years. Do you have all of that with you today?" Marcus reached into his briefcase. "Actually, I do. My company—" "I'm sorry, but we also need to verify the legitimacy of your business. There are federal regulations about money laundering that we take very seriously." Behind Patricia, an elderly white man in a rumpled cardigan approached another teller. "I'd like to open a savings account for my grandson," he said cheerfully. "Of course, Mr. Peterson. Right this way. We can have that set up in just a few minutes." The contrast hit Marcus like a physical blow. No documentation requests, no suspicious glances, just immediate, courteous service for someone who looked like he belonged. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I understand your concerns about regulations. Perhaps if you looked at my identification and business credentials." "Sir, I'm going to need you to understand that this is a reputable institution. We can't just open accounts for anyone who walks in off the street." The words hung in the air like poison. Anyone. The subtext was clear, brutal in its simplicity. Marcus felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up his neck, the same feeling he'd carried since childhood. The knowledge that his worth would always be questioned, his success always suspect. He closed his briefcase with deliberate calm. "I see. Thank you for your time." As Marcus turned toward the exit, something crystallized in his dark eyes. Not anger, but a cold, calculating resolve. The glass doors whispered shut behind him, sealing more than just his departure. The autumn air bit at Marcus's face as he walked across the parking lot, each step echoing off the concrete like a countdown. His breath formed small clouds in the crisp morning, but the cold he felt ran deeper than weather. It was the chill of recognition, the familiar sting of being reduced to a stereotype. 43 years of this. 43 years of walking into rooms where his presence was questioned before his credentials were even considered. The memories cascaded through his mind like a film reel he couldn't stop. Age 7. His teacher assuming he was in the wrong advanced math class. Age 16. Store security following him through every aisle while his white friends shopped freely. Age 25. Venture capitalists questioning whether he was really the founder of his own company. Each incident had carved away a piece of his faith in fairness, replacing it with armor forged from necessity. Marcus reached his Tesla Model S, its obsidian surface reflecting the bank's imposing facade behind him. As he settled into the leather seat, his phone vibrated insistently against the dashboard. "Marcus, we've got 3 acquisition targets ready for your review," came the voice of David Chun, his head of investments. "The biotech firm in Seattle, the renewable energy startup in Austin, and that regional bank chain we discussed." "The bank chain," Marcus said slowly, his eyes still fixed on First National's entrance. "What was the valuation again?" $2.3 billion. "Honestly, it's overpriced given their recent performance issues, but the market position is solid." $2.3 billion. Marcus almost laughed at the cosmic joke. He could write a check for that amount without consulting his accountant. Yet 30 minutes ago, he'd been treated like a potential criminal for wanting to deposit money. His phone buzzed again. This time, his assistant's voice filled the car through the Bluetooth system. "Mr. Williams, the board meeting has been moved to 2 o'clock. The Goldman Sachs team wants to discuss the IPO timeline for the AI division. Also, Forbes is requesting an interview about your inclusion on the billionaire list." "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be there." Mr. Williams, CEO of Williams Tech Ventures. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Inside that bank, he'd been nobody, just another black man who didn't belong. Out here, in the real world, he was one of the most powerful tech entrepreneurs on the planet. The irony wasn't just bitter. It was transformative. This wasn't about his wounded pride anymore. This was about every kid who'd been followed in a store, every professional who'd been questioned in a boardroom, every person who'd been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. Marcus started the engine, but instead of driving away, he sat there for a moment longer. Through the windshield, he watched Patricia Hendricks visible through the bank's windows, going about her day as if nothing had happened. She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. The mahogany conference table in Marcus's downtown office stretched like a battlefield, scattered with documents that would reshape lives. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but Marcus's attention was laser-focused on the damning evidence spread before him. "What you're looking at," said Rebecca Martinez, his lead attorney, "is 20 years of systematic discrimination disguised as banking policy." The files painted a portrait of institutional racism so pervasive it took Marcus's breath away. Loan denial rates for black applicants, 43% higher than whites with identical credit scores. Hispanic small business owners, routinely steered toward subprime products despite qualifying for better terms. Asian families, subjected to additional verification processes that white families never faced. "They've been redlining entire neighborhoods," continued James Thompson, his financial analyst. "Look at this map. Every area with significant minority populations shows a pattern of branch closures and reduced services over the past decade." Marcus studied the color-coded charts, each data point representing a family denied the American dream. "What about their financial position?" "Vulnerable," Rebecca replied, sliding another folder across the table. "Bad commercial real estate investments, declining customer base, and the FDIC has them on a watch list for discriminatory practices. Stock price has dropped 30% in the last 6 months. They're bleeding money and customers," James added. "A hostile takeover would be surprisingly easy, especially with their current regulatory troubles." The irony was almost poetic. First National had spent decades excluding people who looked like Marcus, and now their prejudice had made them weak enough to be consumed by the very community they'd rejected. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia Hendricks straightened her blazer as another customer approached her desk. Maria Santos, a young Latina woman in scrubs, clutched a folder of documents. "I'd like to apply for a small business loan," Maria said nervously. "I'm opening a medical clinic in the East Side." Patricia's eyes swept over Maria's appearance, the modest clothing, the slight accent, the address on her application. "I'm afraid that area is considered high risk for commercial lending. Have you considered looking elsewhere? But I have excellent credit, and the community needs—" "Miss Santos, I'm sure you understand we have to be careful about our investments." The same dismissive tone, the same coded language, the same institutional cruelty wrapped in corporate politeness. Back in his office, Marcus closed the final report. The evidence was overwhelming, the strategy clear. First National Bank had built its foundation on exclusion and discrimination. Now it was time to tear that foundation down. "Draw up the acquisition papers," Marcus said quietly. "All of them." The coffee shop across from First National Bank buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with caffeine. Sarah Chan sat at a corner table, her laptop open, fingers trembling slightly as she typed her story into a Facebook post that would change everything. "I watched them humiliate a black man yesterday," she wrote. "The same bank that made me jump through hoops for 6 months to get a business loan. despite my 780 credit score and profitable restaurant. Sarah remembered her own ordeal, the endless requests for additional documentation, the skeptical questions about her authentic Chinese cuisine, the loan officer who kept mispronouncing her name despite multiple corrections. She'd attributed it to bureaucracy then. Now, watching Marcus's treatment, the pattern became undeniable. Her post went live at 2:47 p.m. Within an hour, it had been shared 43 times. James Rodriguez saw Sarah's post while waiting at the VA hospital. The decorated Marine veteran's jaw clenched as memories flooded back. Every visit to First National shadowed by security guards who treated him like a threat rather than a customer. "Every damn time," he muttered, pulling out his phone. "Every time I walk in there, they follow me like I'm gonna rob the place." His comment under Sarah's post was raw, unfiltered. 20 years of service to this country, and they still see me as a criminal. Hashtag First National Discrimination. The hashtag spread like wildfire through social media. Stories poured in from across the city. A black teacher denied a mortgage despite tenure. A Latino family charged higher fees for the same services. An elderly Asian woman made to wait hours while white customers were served immediately. By evening, local news stations were picking up the story. The bank's pristine glass facade reflected the harsh glare of camera lights as reporters gathered outside, their questions cutting through the autumn air like accusations. Inside First National, Patricia Hendricks watched the growing crowd through her office window. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from corporate headquarters, each ring more urgent than the last. "This is just a misunderstanding," she told herself, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was spreading faster than she could contain it, and for the first time in her career, Patricia Hendricks felt genuinely afraid. The emergency board meeting convened at 6 a.m. in First National's sterile conference room, where Patricia Hendricks sat like a defendant awaiting verdict. The mahogany table that once symbolized power now felt like a barrier between her and salvation. Chairman Robert Sterling's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Patricia, we've lost 12 major corporate accounts since yesterday. 12. Our stock is down 18% in pre-market trading." The numbers hit her like physical blows. Patricia had built her career on control, on maintaining the bank's standards. But now those very standards were crumbling around her. The morning news played silently on the wall-mounted screen, showing protesters gathering outside their branches across the city. "It was a misunderstanding," Patricia said, her voice smaller than she intended. "One isolated incident that's been blown out of proportion by social media." Isolated. Board member Linda Washington, one of only 2 black members, leaned forward. "We have documented complaints going back 15 years. The FDIC has been watching us for discriminatory practices. This isn't isolated, this is systemic." Patricia's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. She'd spent 23 years climbing the corporate ladder, believing she was protecting the bank's interests. Now she realized she'd been protecting something far more sinister, a culture of exclusion that had infected every level of the institution. "We need immediate damage control," Sterling continued. "Policy reviews, sensitivity training, public apologies. And, Patricia," he paused, the silence heavy with implication. "We need to discuss your future here." Across town, Marcus's acquisition team worked with surgical precision. The bank's weakened state made them vulnerable, and Marcus's lawyers moved like sharks sensing blood in the water. Financial documents flew between offices, each signature bringing them closer to their goal. "Their stock price makes this almost too easy," Rebecca Martinez reported via conference call. "The board is panicking. Major investors are pulling out, and regulatory pressure is mounting. It's the perfect storm." Marcus listened from his office, watching the news coverage on multiple screens. The irony wasn't lost on him. Patricia's prejudice had created the very conditions that would lead to her downfall. Back at First National, Patricia's assistant knocked frantically on her door. "Ms. Hendricks, there's something you need to see. The financial news is reporting a hostile takeover attempt. Someone's been buying up our shares aggressively." Patricia's blood ran cold. "Who? Who's behind it?" "They're not saying yet, but whoever it is has serious money. Billions." The room seemed to spin around Patricia as the full weight of her situation crashed down. Her prejudice hadn't just cost her a customer. It had potentially cost her everything. Her career, her reputation, her sense of security, all crumbling because she couldn't see past the color of a man's skin. Outside her window, the protesters' chants grew louder, their voices carrying a simple message: no more. The breaking news alert flashed across every screen in First National Bank at exactly 11:47 a.m. Tech billionaire Marcus Williams acquires First National Bank for $2.3 billion in cash deal. Patricia Hendricks stared at her computer monitor, the words blurring as her world tilted on its axis. The photograph accompanying the article showed Marcus Williams, the same man she dismissed 3 days ago, standing confidently in a boardroom, his hand extended in a handshake that had just sealed her fate. The newsroom buzzed with excitement as anchors delivered the story with barely contained amazement. In what can only be described as poetic justice, Williams, who Forbes ranks as the 47th richest person in America, has acquired the very institution that allegedly refused him basic banking services just days ago. Patricia's hands shook as she scrolled through article after article. Marcus Williams, CEO of Williams Tech Ventures. Net worth, $8.2 billion. Known for revolutionary AI software that powered half the world's smartphones. Philanthropist who donated over $500 million to educational initiatives in underserved communities. The man she treated like a potential criminal was one of the most powerful entrepreneurs on the planet. Jesus Christ, Patricia. Her assistant's voice came from the doorway, barely above a whisper. Do you know what you've done? The hallways of First National had transformed into a gauntlet of shame. Colleagues who once sought her approval now averted their eyes, their whispered conversations dying as she passed. The security guard who'd watched Marcus with suspicion now couldn't meet her gaze. She's the one, she heard someone murmur. She's the manager who turned him away. Patricia retreated to her office, but there was no escape from the coverage. Every news channel, every financial website, every social media platform carried the same narrative. A story of prejudice meeting its match in the form of unprecedented corporate justice. The irony cut deeper with each revelation. Marcus Williams wasn't just wealthy. He was exactly the kind of client First National desperately needed. His companies employed thousands, his investments moved markets, his endorsement could have elevated their reputation beyond measure. Instead, she'd seen only his skin color and made assumptions that would define the rest of her career. Her phone rang incessantly, reporters seeking comment, colleagues demanding explanations, corporate headquarters summoning her for immediate meetings. But Patricia couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process the magnitude of her mistake. On her computer screen, a new headline appeared: New owner promises complete transformation of banking culture. The transformation was already beginning, and Patricia Hendricks was about to discover exactly what that meant for her future. Marcus Williams walked through the same glass doors he'd been dismissed from just 1 week ago, but this time the marble floors belonged to him. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across a lobby that would never be the same. His footsteps echoed with purpose, each click of his Italian leather shoes marking the beginning of a new era that would ripple far beyond these walls and into the very fabric of how financial institutions could serve their communities. The irony wasn't lost on him as he moved through the space where he'd been humiliated. Every detail was seared into his memory. The dismissive glances, the fabricated excuses, the way Patricia Hendricks had looked at him like he was a threat rather than a potential partner. But today, those memories fueled something greater than anger. They fueled transformation. Every employee had gathered in the main banking hall, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. Tellers stood beside loan officers, security guards next to executives, all united in their uncertainty about what came next. The air was thick with tension, whispered conversations dying as Marcus took his position at the center of the room where customer service desks had been hastily moved aside to create space for this unprecedented gathering. He stood before them not as a conqueror seeking vengeance, but as someone who understood the profound weight of this moment, for himself, for them, and for every person who'd been turned away from these doors because of prejudice disguised as policy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The man they'd rejected now held their futures in his hands. Yet his presence radiated something unexpected, hope rather than retribution. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the silent space with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms filled with world leaders and tech titans. "You're wondering if I'm here for revenge. You're wondering who's going to lose their job, who's going to pay for what happened to me last week." The silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Patricia Hendricks stood near the back, her face pale but her posture straight. She'd spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment, expecting termination, public humiliation, the complete destruction of everything she'd built over 2 decades in banking. Her hands clutched a resignation letter she'd written and rewritten a dozen times, each draft an attempt to salvage some dignity from the wreckage of her career. "But I'm not here to destroy," Marcus continued, his eyes sweeping across the assembled faces, noting the relief that flickered across some expressions and the skepticism that remained in others. "I'm here to build something better, something that serves everyone who walks through these doors, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or what assumptions we might make about their worth." A young teller named Jennifer shifted nervously, remembering how she'd watched Patricia dismiss Marcus without ever questioning whether it was right. She'd been raised to respect authority, to trust that managers knew best. But now she wondered how many other customers had been treated unfairly while she stood by in silence. The weight of complicity pressed down on her shoulders like a physical burden, making her question everything she thought she knew about her workplace. An older loan officer, Robert, felt the weight of his own participation in a system he'd never bothered to examine. 30 years in banking had taught him to follow protocols, to minimize risk, to protect the institution's interests. But those protocols, he was beginning to realize, had been built on foundations of exclusion and bias that had nothing to do with sound financial practice and everything to do with perpetuating inequality. How many dreams had he crushed with his adherence to policies that were never really about protecting the bank? "This institution has a choice," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, more passionate. "We can continue operating as we have, excluding and diminishing people based on bias and fear. Or we can become something revolutionary, a bank that truly serves all communities with dignity and respect." The transformation he envisioned wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was about fundamentally changing how an institution saw its role in the community, how it measured success, and how it treated the most vulnerable members of society. It was about recognizing that banking wasn't just about money. It was about dreams, opportunities, and the basic human dignity of being seen and valued for who you are rather than judged for what you appear to be. Marcus had learned this lesson the hard way, building his empire from nothing while constantly having to prove his worth to people who saw his skin color before they saw his brilliance. Every boardroom he'd entered, every investor he'd pitched to, every partnership he'd negotiated, all of it shadowed by the assumption that he didn't belong, that his success was somehow suspect or undeserved. "Some of you are wondering if you'll have a place in this new vision," Marcus continued, his gaze moving deliberately across the crowd. "The answer is yes, if you're willing to grow, to learn, to acknowledge that the way we've done things isn't the way we have to keep doing them. Change is never easy, but it's necessary if we want to be part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem." He could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty about what this meant for their careers, their security, their sense of identity. Change was terrifying, especially when it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about systems they'd participated in without question. But Marcus also saw something else, a flicker of hope, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, they could be part of something better. "Ms. Hendricks," Marcus said, his eyes finding hers across the room, "I'd like to speak with you privately." The walk to her office felt like a funeral march. Patricia's colleagues watched her pass with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they weren't in her position. The hallway that had once been her domain now felt foreign, hostile, a reminder of how quickly power could shift and how fragile professional security really was. Each step toward her office felt like walking toward Judgment Day, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown to her professional execution. In her office, soon to be redesigned with community artwork and photos celebrating diversity. Patricia sat across from the man whose life she'd tried to diminish. The mahogany desk between them seemed to shrink under the weight of their shared history. The irony of the power dynamic wasn't lost on either of them. The woman who'd wielded institutional authority to exclude now sat powerless before the man she'd rejected, waiting to learn her fate. The office felt different now, smaller somehow, as if her authority had been the only thing giving it substance. The diplomas on her wall, the awards for excellence in customer service, the photos with local politicians, all of it seemed hollow now, meaningless tokens of a career built on exclusion. "I have a choice for you," Marcus said quietly, his tone neither vindictive nor patronizing. "You can resign today with a generous severance package, enough to maintain your lifestyle while you figure out your next steps. No public humiliation, no drawn-out termination process. You can walk away and start fresh somewhere else, and this conversation stays between us." Patricia's hands trembled in her lap. This was the mercy she'd never expected, the grace she wasn't sure she deserved. After days of media scrutiny and professional isolation, the offer of a quiet exit felt like salvation. She could disappear, rebuild her reputation elsewhere, pretend this nightmare had never happened. It would be easy, clean, final. "Or," Marcus continued, "you can stay and help me fix what's broken here." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Stay. The damage you've caused is real, Patricia. The hurt you've inflicted on families and businesses in this community runs deep. Children have grown up in neighborhoods without adequate banking services because of decisions made in rooms like this one. Entrepreneurs have seen their dreams crushed by bias disguised as risk assessment. Families have been denied mortgages not because they couldn't afford them, but because someone decided they didn't belong in certain neighborhoods." Each word was a hammer blow, forcing Patricia to confront the human cost of her prejudice. She'd never thought about the ripple effects of her decisions, the way her bias had shaped entire communities, limited opportunities, perpetuated cycles of poverty and exclusion. Tears she'd held back for days finally spilled over, carving tracks down her carefully composed facade. "I don't understand. Why would you give me a second chance after what I did to you? After the humiliation, the assumptions, the way I treated you like you were nothing." Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. "Because transformation requires witnesses. Because the people who've been hurt by this institution need to see that change is possible, even in the most unlikely places. And because firing you would be easy, helping you become better serves a greater purpose. It shows that redemption is possible when someone is truly committed to doing the work." The conditions were non-negotiable. Extensive diversity training that would challenge every assumption she'd ever made, community service in the neighborhoods she'd helped exclude, and a new role focused on repairing relationships with minority-owned businesses. It would be humbling, difficult work that would strip away her authority and force her to confront the harm she'd caused face-to-face with the people she'd hurt. "You'll work directly with the communities you've excluded," Marcus continued. "You'll listen to their stories, understand their struggles, and help rebuild the trust that's been broken. It won't be easy, and it won't be comfortable. But if you're serious about change, about becoming better than you were, then this is your chance." Patricia stared at him through her tears, seeing not the man she'd dismissed but the leader he'd always been. "I'll stay," she whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of genuine commitment. "I want to do better. I need to do better." Over the following months, First National became unrecognizable. Marcus hired diverse leadership at every level, bringing in executives who understood the communities they served not as statistics or risk assessments, but as neighbors and partners. Dr. Amara Johnson, a former civil rights lawyer who'd spent decades fighting discriminatory lending practices, became Chief Diversity Officer. Her first day, she walked through the same doors Marcus had been turned away from, but this time she was welcomed as a leader, a change agent, a symbol of the transformation to come. Carlos Mendoza, who'd built successful community banks in underserved areas, took over commercial lending with a mandate to say yes whenever possible. His philosophy was simple: find reasons to approve loans, not excuses to deny them. Within his first month, He'd approved more minority-owned business loans than the bank had in the previous year. The changes went far beyond personnel. Marcus implemented bias training that went beyond corporate checkbox exercises, bringing in real community members to share their stories of rejection and resilience. He established community investment programs that pumped millions into previously redline neighborhoods, funding everything from small businesses to affordable housing projects to educational initiatives that would break cycles of poverty and exclusion. Some employees couldn't adapt to the new culture. Richard Thornton, a senior loan officer who'd spent 15 years finding creative ways to deny applications from minority borrowers, quietly submitted his resignation rather than face the scrutiny of his past decisions. He'd built his career on exclusion, and the thought of having to justify his actions to the people he'd hurt was too much to bear. 3 tellers who'd participated in the culture of suspicion and discrimination chose early retirement packages rather than embrace change, unable to see past their own prejudices. They left quietly, their departure barely noticed as the bank filled with new energy, new voices, new possibilities. But others, like Patricia, who underwent intensive training and spent her weekends volunteering in the communities she'd once excluded, discovered they could become part of the solution. Jennifer, the young teller, became an advocate for financial literacy programs in local schools, teaching children about money management and showing them that banks could be places of opportunity rather than exclusion. Robert, the loan officer, used his experience to mentor minority entrepreneurs navigating the lending process, helping them understand the system while working to make that system more fair. The transformation wasn't just institutional. It was personal, profound, and proof that even the most entrenched systems could change when leadership demanded justice over comfort and growth over stagnation. Sarah Chun opened her second restaurant with a loan approved in record time. The same loan officer who'd once questioned her authentic cuisine now celebrating her expansion plans and recommending her business to other customers. James Rodriguez became the bank's first veteran liaison, helping other former service members access the financial services they'd earned through their sacrifice and dedication to their country. Maria Santos's clinic received funding that transformed healthcare in the East Side. The same neighborhood Patricia had once written off as high risk, now thriving with new investment and opportunity. 6 months after Marcus's humiliating rejection, First National Bank had become a model for inclusive banking practices, featured in Harvard Business Review and studied by financial institutions across the country. The lobby that had once felt cold and unwelcoming now buzzed with diverse voices, multiple languages, and the energy of a community finally being served with dignity and respect. Marcus had turned his moment of humiliation into a legacy of hope, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred isn't revenge. It's transformation that lifts everyone higher and creates lasting change that echoes through generations.